Hello and welcome to today's episode, which isn't the one about Chinese lighting because I've had to jump that one. I'm still waiting for extra bits and pieces to make some of the ones that I bought for that video actually work. So you'll have to wait a bit longer for that one till the parts come and I can fix them and then I can tell you how good or bad they are, but that's probably a clue. Today we're going to look at microphones for very specific purposes. In recording studios, when we're recording sort of people singing and stuff, instruments, choirs, orchestras, well, we're very, very careful about which microphones we choose. And pretty much there isn't really an all-rounder that seems to do the job. I better explain that. Because when you're poor, you try to buy a microphone that will do everything pretty well. And very rarely does that actually work. So you pick a microphone that for one singer sounds great. You try it on another singer and it sounds horrible. You try and pick a microphone to record a guitar and it's great. And then you buy a new guitar and discover that the new guitar and the old microphone just don't go together well. It's very, very specific stuff. And we choose microphones and turn others away because of what we like. Well, it's not like that in every way that we work. Because today we're going to look at microphones for presidents and prime ministers. Yep, you heard right. A government buys some microphones and they put them in front of their president or the prime minister. So whether you're in the US or the UK, the same rules apply. You put a microphone in front of somebody and it's pretty critical stuff. Doesn't really matter what your politics is. You want to know what's going on and you want to hear clearly. And from their point of view, I guess, you don't want something that's going to let you down. So there seem to be differences between the UK and the US. But the one thing that they both agree on is they don't follow trends. So here we have our current Prime Minister. Whether you think he's going to be the Prime Minister for much longer, that's probably a matter for the electorate next time. But realistically, there's our Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, and he's in our House of Commons. And he's obviously having a go at the other side. It's pretty obvious what he's doing. But if you look in front of him, he's got a very unusual looking microphone. Well, the same thing applies if you actually look to the US. There's a picture of the current US president. And he's standing at the podium doing one of his speeches. And again, who knows how long he'll actually be there. But that's probably something for other videos. There's something very common though. That picture there is President Biden talking into an SM57. He's actually got two of them with windshields to stop the wind. But that's what it is. It's an SM57. And so we're talking about the President of the United States talking into a microphone that you can buy off the shelf for less than £100. That sort of says something about Shure SM57s. It doesn't say they're the best, but they clearly haven't got anything that does the job better. Skip back a few years, and there's President Nixon at the podium with SM57s. Exactly the same. So nothing has changed in America. Well, what about the UK? If we go from Rishi Sunak back to Margaret Thatcher in the 70s, we've got a microphone that looks very similar. But in actual fact, it's not. That particular one there is an AKG 202. If we go back to Rishi Sunak, we've got an AKG 222. So, same looking microphone, but the 202 in the 70s was replaced with the 222. Pretty much the same design, just a little bit smaller. If you go back from our current Prime Minister a bit, then there is Boris Johnson with another AKG 222. Let's look at these AKGs. So that's a 202. The giveaway is that sort of silver bit on the end. And the 222 looks pretty much the same. But there's a small size difference. I mean, we're not talking a huge amount. The giveaway, I think, really, for most times, is the silver ring that goes around the top. If it's got the silver ring at the top, it's an older one, a 202. And if it doesn't have the silver ring, I mean, there is actually a very tiny silver ring around there, but it doesn't stand out quite so much as that one. So the 222 is the current one. Okay, we all know what an SM57 is. There's an SM57, and this is my oldest one. So this is my oldest functioning SM57, and it's been through the wars a bit, but it's still reliable, dependable, and sounds exactly the same as the brand new ones. So 3 microphones. The American-made SM57, of course, chosen by the Americans for their president. And for some very strange reason, we've actually got the AKGs, which I think were made in Vienna originally. But there's a reason that they were chosen. The reason was really the BBC. I mean, all things audio in Great Britain tend to have been originated by the BBC, who choose things because they get the job done. So very often they would be the people that set a specification and people will build things for them. But the 222 and the 202, why did they choose them? What makes these microphones unusual? Well, they're 2 microphones in one box. The bit at the front is the high frequency microphone, and further back in the unit is a grill, and that lets bass into the back, and there's actually a bass transducer inside there. So it's 2 mics in one package. One does bass, one does the treble. The idea being that if you bring it really close to your mouth, then that bass thing that makes it very muddy and boomy is still actually a fair way away. So when you put these very close, you don't get that sort of proximity effect that sort of you do on practically every other cardioid microphone. So with these ones, 2 elements, 1 big body. The 222 that replaced it has exactly the same system, 2 elements, 1 at the front, 1 at the back, split on frequency. But what they've done is made sure that the access to that one is not a big, ugly, silvery, slotted thing. So we've actually got a more conventional looking microphone, haven't we? And these things are really lovely. Very neutral, very flat. And because with things like Parliament and the USA's president, you actually want the standard sound from place to place. Now, the USA people, as I understand it, sort this out by having a standard microphone that they can pretty well get up and running almost in any part of the world, run by a special organisation, and the presidents all use the same system. With something like the AKG, the BBC would put them in studios, they put them in the House of Commons. The fundamental thing would be that you'd put the microphone at a distance, so they're not going to be yelling into it from a close distance. It's going to be distant miking. These things with their cardioid sort of pattern will collect the audio from someone even if they move about fairly vigorously, as in when they're shouting at the other side in the House of Commons. So off-axis sound doesn't change in tone that much. So that's, I think, why the BBC picked those. Reliable, solid. The fact that they're a little bit unusual looking doesn't matter. In actual fact, I think it's probably quite an attractive microphone to be constantly seen in photographs and on the television. Yet it's got really good audio, primarily for speech. A few people do use these for music. So with the switch that's in there, you can actually knock the bottom off to 2 degrees. It works quite well. You can actually have a 6 dB roll off at the bottom or a 12 dB roll off at the bottom. It's a fairly useful microphone. On the older one, the same position was on there. For some strange reason, it was always marked -7 and -20, which I thought was a bit of a strange sort of way to do it. But, you know, it works. With the 202, up till the late 70s, and these were really, really common. Once we moved into the 80s, then they started to move to the 222s. And we're still using them. So realistically, it's had a service life of what, 35 years plus? And before that, the 202. All right, so what have we got for the Americans? Some of the microphones that you see on the American president look a bit different. In actual fact, they're not. So when we see the SM57 for the American presidents on their podium, they tend to look a bit different. And the reason is they add on one of these Shure windscreens. You stick it over the top and then you shove this little thing up there. And then you can do a little set screw up and that will stick it on. So the American president actually is using an SM57 with one of those on. And that's the reason they look a bit different. And the other thing they do with the microphone in America is they use an isolation mount for it. Shure sell one's rather nice. It's got a circular rubber ring and you post the microphone into the rubber ring and it holds it secure. But it does isolate it to a large degree from things like scripts and things being put on the podium. So if someone puts something down on the podium and it goes clonk, then that rubber mount will survive a little bit better. We've got all these microphones connected directly to a Zoom mixer, no inline preamps. The mixer is displaying around about -12 on the peaks at that level, and up to about 8 on the knob on this Zoom is pretty noise free. So I'll probably recover a little bit of that when I'm actually doing the editing. But the SM57 is the one that you're hearing me on now. So let's switch now to the AKG 202. The older of the two AKGs, and it's been about for quite a while. And the AKG 202 is the slightly bigger unit of the two as well. So they're pretty close. But the 202 and the 222 share so much technology. I think they're sort of interchangeable really in practical terms. So that's the 202. We'll switch across now to the 222. You're now hearing me on the AKG 222. So the two German mics doing pretty well, I think. Flip back from the 222, we'll go back to the 57. So on the Shure 57 is definitely a little bit brighter, I think. There's a definite difference between them. But they're within the realms of being sort of interchangeable. I think if you took the American president and put them on a 222, there'd be a slight tonal difference from what people are used to. But I think it's close. The SM57, of course, is a £100 microphone, and the current D222 is going to set you back a bit more than that, depending on where you live and the prices you're going to pay. But realistically, if you tried to pick one up, even second hand, you're going to be looking at £250 to get a decent 222. Probably about just over a couple of £100 for a 202. There's still quite a few about. I've actually destroyed one recently, which was rather annoying, and I'm trying to rebuild it, but I'm not having much luck at the moment. It's a bit like a jigsaw puzzle. But while we've been speaking, we've been switching about from the 57 to the 202 and to the 222. What do you think? This is what presidents sound like. They don't have my voice, but of course it goes from sort of people yelling, shouting, to people talking really sort of quietly and sort of emotionally to the public. And these microphones seem to do a pretty good job. The SM57 doesn't actually do a bad job on speech for a £100 mic, and of course it's tough, dependable, reliable, and if you were to lose them, you could probably find one in virtually any country. You couldn't say that about the 202 and the 222. It's highly unlikely people in America would come across these microphones as norm, because they very much were a European-friendly product, and they didn't really travel across the sea. SM57s, of course, did. So the UK is full of SM57s. And, of course, the only important thing you have to remember with a 57 is make sure it's a real one, because there are so many SM57s that are dodgy. I think when we've been doing all our tests and messing about here, I think I've got 4 Shure 57s that are definite Chinese copies, and it's so important to keep them away from the other ones I've got, because I don't want to get them mixed up, because they don't sound as good. And I'm now getting a little bin that I'm filling up with Chinese copies so I don't get mixed up, because I don't want to do that. I think an interesting experiment, and one that I'm glad I've done. I hope this has been useful. I mean, I think it generally has, just to let you hear the differences between UK and US. So if it's been useful, do click that like button, and it lets me know that you enjoyed it. If you want to, leave me some comments as well. I don't mind. And quite a lot of people are sort of emailing comments, which is interesting, but you can leave them here if you want to. See you on the next video. Look after yourselves. Hopefully it will be about lights, if the parts to repair them come and I can make the video. It's a bit embarrassing that I've got some brand new items that need repairing before I can even plug them in. See you on the next one. Take care.